Okay, so good evening, everyone. My name is James Hospitalis from Earth Medic and Earth Nurse, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this fifth skills and practice session in our climate and health course, which comprises lectures and skills and practice sessions. This evening's skills and practice session is going to be led by CIMH, the Caribbean Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology, based in Barbados. So they perform a really important role. They'll tell you a bit more about it. But I always think of them as the folks who control the weather. They monitor all the stuff with weather, rainfall and heat and storms and dust. So they're going to be telling us about the tools that they have that as practitioners you can access and be better prepared for the changing climate that we're in. In Trinidad, if some of you are from Trinidad, you know the last week or 10 days we've had a lot of rain and flooding and power outages. All of a sudden, after weeks of dry weather, it's suddenly switched. So hello to all of you who've just joined. Hello, Guyana, who's just joined. I'm gonna pass over now to Adrian Trotman from CIMH, who will introduce the CIMH team and take us through the session to explain the tools that CIMH has that we can access. Over to you, Adrian.
Hello, good evening. Can you all hear?
Hearing you fine.
Great, thank you. We have to speak to the mask, as you know, we're still in COVID and we are still in indoor protocols in Barbados. And I just want to welcome you on behalf of the principal and staff of the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology. We are based here in Barbados, and we are bringing this to you from our campus in St. James, Barbados. And today we'll be looking at our climate products and services, and we will have a bit of a discussion here on the types of products and how it might be able to support decision making in the health sector. And we hope that you will enjoy this. We hope that more importantly, that you would learn something from it, and hopefully, and most important to us as meteorologists and climatologists in this room, most important to us is that now you might be aware of information that you might not have been aware of before, or you might have been aware of information but not necessarily know how to use it. That's possible as well. So hopefully we can get over some of those hurdles that I just mentioned. And if for all of you, you just take one of those things away, I would have feel that we've accomplished much this evening. So I am Adrian Trotman. I am, pull my mask down briefly. I'm the Chief of Applied Meteorology and Climatology here at CIMH, but I also head what is the World Meteorological Organization that designated Regional Climate Center for the Caribbean. And as I said, it's based here, it's a center based here at CIMH. And with me, I have to my right, CIMH's climatologist, Dr. Cedric Van Meerbeek. And to his right,
good evening, everyone.
Great. Sorry, and to his right, you have Miss Jodianne Petrie, one of our technical officers. And I want to say here that we should have had Dr. Roche Mohan, our social scientist, with us, but she took ill yesterday, and unfortunately, she's not able to join us. So hopefully we hear some good news as to her progress to the illness, but we will continue and we will keep her in our thoughts and prayers as we continue through this evening. So this is it from the three staff team here at CIMH for this evening's session. So we're going to share screen because we have some slides and we have 4 questions that we want you to engage you and engage you on as we build your awareness. And more importantly, as I said earlier, we certainly want to be able to illustrate some of these products and services, tools, and so on at CIMH. That will help to build your awareness. Okay. You can see, are you seeing anything? Are you seeing the slides? I should have
Seeing
asked
them
that.
fine, Adrian. Yep.
Right. So what I want to start with is a little bit about the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology. I really don't know how many of you have heard of CIMH. In the olden days, when I first came here, and I didn't want to say how long ago, but some 31 years now, when I first came here, the name of this campus was Caribbean Meteorological Institute. And it was on the same campus as the Caribbean Operational Hydrological Institute. These 2 agencies merged to form what is now CIMH. And as part of this background, you may see from what we are doing, what we see outlined as the main functions of CIMH, you would come to recognize why we could be in this position where we can provide climate services, right? And I just want to say to you that this service to the health sector is just one of many. We have products and services and partnerships and so on with 6 sectors really. Health being one, tourism, water, agriculture and food security, energy and tourism. So those are the 5 apart from health. And one of the things you would recognize is that there's no separation, there's no segmentation, there's no silos in these, because health would affect the tourism industry because tourists are people. Water would affect health because, as you know, if water is not safe, then your health could be impacted. Nutrition is important to health, right? And oh yes, I think there's one I didn't remember, which is disaster risk reduction. This with SEDIMA and other disaster agencies, right? So, and energy, the energy sector is key. Even if you talk about energy to keep our hospitals running, powered, you know. So all of these fit together, and we have this consortium where we meet and we plan out, at least up until now, up to 2030, the work we will do to improve climate services in the region. So CIMH is a regional training center. Most of the meteorologists in the Caribbean are trained here. Very few are trained outside of CIMH from the region, particularly our 16 member states of CARICOM and associated states. So we are a Center for Research in Weather, water, and climate, and other aspects of environment. We are the Regional Climate Data Center. We are recognized by the World Meteorological World Meteorological Organization as a regional instrument center. We are a Center for Excellence in Satellite Meteorology for training in it. And as I said, we are the WMO. Can I say WMO now for World Meteorological Organization? We are WMO designated Regional Climate Center for the Caribbean. But very important to this discussion, and I'm sure when Dr. Andrea Seeley had her session a few weeks ago, it was James. We are the Center for Sand and Dust Storm Warning Advisory and Assessment System for the Pan American region under the World Meteorological Organization. And I'm sure that through that session, Dr. Seeley would have triggered your thoughts regarding sand, dust, and health, especially respiratory and ocular health. And we're the Caribbean Center for Climate and Environmental Simulations. We advise regional governments in areas related to weather, climate, and water. And we serve providing specialized services to industry in the region. So right now, I'll turn over to Cedric to give you some further background with respect to climate information decision making. Dr. Van Meerbeek, over to you.
Thank you, Adrian, and a good evening to all. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation to make a contribution in this session. If we think about how climate can affect us, there are different timescales of decision making. One timescale that more and more people are more and more familiar with is the climate change timescale, which is what I believe, James, the course that is provided is focusing on. And what is climate information informing? It informs adaptation to certain kinds of hazards related to climate that may change in future in terms of their severity, in terms of their frequency, in terms of their location. So climate change information is a type of climate information that is specifically aimed at helping us adapt to the changes that are impending in the long-term future. But there's the short-term future as well, which is where we've all been familiar with weather forecasts and weather information. But between climate change and weather, there's still a climate timescale that is often not so important in our daily lives, or so we think, and that is the timescale from a few weeks to a few years. And why is it important to include that timescale? Imagine that there's going to be a hurricane that affects your island. Sometimes we can tell with more than a week in advance that a system is approaching the region. And then as we draw near to the day, we can find out that the hurricane or that the system has grown into a hurricane with very strong winds, with storm surge, with lots of rainfall, which triggers flooding, etc., etc. But if we know it longer time in advance, even if we're not sure if it's going to hit one island or the next island, it helps in getting prepared to respond on time and in an appropriate way. So climate variability, as we call it, which is basically up and down swings in temperature, in rainfall, in wind, etc., but on the time scales between weeks and years, can help us to prepare for impending hazards. Now, that kind of information that comes from weather forecasts and from climate forecast at the seasonal to sub-seasonal time scale, sub-seasonal being a few weeks, this is what we focus on at the Regional Climate Center, and that is called climate early warning information. So again, we have information for adaptation on the long term, and we have information at the shorter term, which is what we call early warning information. That is the core of our activities in terms of providing information at CIMH, at the Regional Climate Center for the Caribbean. Next slide. So to summarize that, if you were to look at the time going from left to right, from a very distant future to the present day, going from decades to years ahead, then moving on to the season up ahead when we expect, for instance, the hurricane season to be particularly active this year, to when we know that the hurricane system will be active, alerting throughout the season when we see a system developing, through to alerting and updating those alerts on daily basis as to where the storm is expected to be, how strong is it going to be, when is it going to hit us, etc. All of this information is provided at the appropriate time scale for long-term planning, that's climate change, preparedness, that's seasonal to sub-seasonal, for alerting and response, which is just a few weeks to a few days to a few hours ahead of time. Next, please. So within our realm, what do we do then? We provide two types of climate early warning information. One is prediction into the future, but what is equally important, if not more important, is to monitor the situation. How is it evolving? How are we seeing the weather events or the climate events impacting us? if we know how it impacts us, how it affects us, when it's there, then we can build prediction systems to know how it will evolve in the future with some lead time. And that is our aim of climate prediction, to be able, with sufficient lead time, to tell you in advance, listen, something is likely to happen. That's at the seasonal time scale. At the sub-seasonal time scale, we see, oh, we're seeing a system developing. Let's keep ourselves up to date with the weather forecast, which will then tell us day by day how that system is developing and whether or not it will affect us in a big way. So now that we understand the climate timescales a little bit, I will leave it to Adrian to introduce us into some of the climate information products that we deliver.
Okay, so hopefully you're still seeing our slides here. You
Seeing them
heard
very
from
clearly.
Cedric.
Yes, we are. Go ahead, Adrian.
Right, okay, sorry, okay. So you heard Cedric talk about monitoring the climate. Monitoring the climate is extremely important. As I said, that's how we know how things are moving and shifting. In the case of weather, it might be from hour to hour sometimes, but in the case of climate, it might be from week to week or month to month or season to season. These things, this is the way we can recognize what's happening, how things are changing. So we monitor. And many of our monitoring products, as you will see on the left-hand side, those are some of the monitoring products. Many of our monitoring products look back up to a year. So for example, the bottom here, that's one of our temperature maps. So we look back at the last month, because what has happened in the recent past will impact on the outcome, health outcomes as well, in the future. What you were exposed to helps to determine how you will respond to future conditions. All right? So that's the temperature in the bottom left, but you can have rainfall as well being monitored. All right? So in that middle diagram on your left, you're monitoring the rainfall. In this case, it's looking at rainfall above average and rainfall below average. So this is one of the products we use, what we call the standardized precipitation index. This is one of the products we use to monitor drought, for example. So we monitor drought, we look at the last month, the last 3 months, the last 6 months, the last 12 months, and the last 24 months. So if you look at that middle diagram on the left under climate monitoring, you will see some reds and you will see some blues, right? Now the reds tell you the rainfall is less than what it normally is for that period. And how much less it is, in other words, the margin of the deficit. Could you point to put the screen over the middle one? Are you cursor? Over the middle to the left. Are you seeing it? She's putting, Jody just placed her cursor over the standardized precipitation index. And you can see clearly, well, I hope I'm not colorblind, but you can see clearly yellows, reds, and oranges, or whatever the case might be. And then you see blues. The blues tell you that whatever period it is, whether it's a month ago, or the last 3 months, or the last 6 months, or the last 12 months, or the last 24 months, it tells you, the blue tells you more rainfall than you're accustomed having for that period. The reds and the orange tells you less rainfall than you're accustomed having for that period. You see what I'm saying? So you can tell then, okay, so this is an area of a deficit in rainfall, because you put your cursor over any of the reds, oranges, right? So there's an area of a deficit in rainfall. And the longer that deficit is, the longer the period of that red or orange, the greater the impact is possible. So the deeper the color, the greater the deficit in rainfall. But the interval now, the longer the interval, you can also have a bigger impact on your water. So that's when you start to talk drought. So it's a deficit in rainfall. And water is important for health. Available water is important. Sometimes if you don't have enough water, you get contamination. For example, in Barbados, you have groundwater. If the groundwater gets depleted by a long period of deficit, you can get saline, you can start to get saline water, right? In our very small basins in the region, you can start to get a deficit in river flow. And if you're accustomed using surface water as your drinking water, the companies, then you have a problem with respect to access to water, right? And if you are in COVID and you need hygiene and sanitation and hygiene, if you're in a pocket that had concerns over water availability during COVID, you have a concern because you need to wash regularly, right? So these are the sort of products that we're talking about. There are many more monitoring, but I will stop there. I think you got a sense of where I'm coming from. But we also have products that tells us what is likely to happen over the next 3 to 6 months. For example, in your top right-hand corner under outlooks, the drought, if you can place your cursor, top right, under, yes. So that's one of our drought outlooks, right? So if you read the top right-hand corner of that, the green, is that green? Sorry, the greenish colors tell you those areas have no concerns, maybe for the next 3 months or whatever the case might be. Or it varies in length, as I told you. So no concern in those areas, but when you start to see yellows, point to some yellows. When you start to see yellows, it starts to tell you this is a drought watch we are recommending to the countries. That's the final determination is made by the National Health Service, right? So in other words, we're saying, listen, there could be something on the horizon. Please monitor your water levels and take note of where your water resources are. But then when you see browns, point to the brown there, right? Then you start to say, listen, we are recommending a warning, okay? The water deficits are likely to reach a level that's very impactful. And then when you see that reddish color on the left, you say, basically, you're in a drought emergency. Either you've been getting severely impacted by drought, or you will be in the very near future, all right? So we have, other than that, we talk about, and we'll come to more of this as we go through, but we talk about potential flood events when we talk about heavy, very wet spells and so on. We can talk about the bottom, you see right at the bottom, we do our own hurricane season forecast. But the important thing here is when we have our monitoring information and our future or outlooks, can I say outlooks now, or even forecasts, if we talk about the future, we package these, the important products of the day for our sectors, right? So we can have the tourism sector, you see, Caribbean Tourism Climatic Bulletin. And then on the right-hand side, we have the Caribbean Drought Bulletin, where we specifically focus on drought. So we have sector bulletins, and we have the more technical bulletins, or even a newsletter. And then at the bottom, what we want you to recognize is that we have been working with the National Meteorological and Hydrological Services in the region to package their own information supported by their sectors, right? So we're going to come later, if you can. We're going to come a little later to the bulletin that is really specific to the health sector.
Thank you, Adrian.
Can you hear Jody?
Can you guys hear me? Okay, great. So now that
You're a bit
Adrian
faint.
and Cedric has gone through some of the products that we offer at CIMH, we just have a poll question for you guys, and I'm going to paste the link for the question in the chat, and I would like for persons to click on the link, and that way be able to participate in the poll.
So we
Jody,
need your participation to get your thoughts on this.
Don't worry about it. So Jody now included a link in the chat that you can click on to take part in the poll. So if you are willing, it's a fun exercise. It doesn't require much thinking, but it does lead you into the thinking that we want to go moving ahead throughout this presentation.
Can you see the link?
Yes, we see the link and it's working. Yes.
Great.
Excellent.
So you can begin.
Right, so far, the question that we have is, so we realize that many aspects of our climate are monitored and predicted by CIMH. Therefore, the early warning information, or alternatively what we have at CIMH, the Health Climatic Bulletin, can provide useful information that can be applied to which of the following. And I think person started to answer already, and so far we have quite a few, so 45 persons answered in totality, and 42 persons are saying, you know, all of the above. And okay, so the answers are still coming in so far. Everyone, most persons think that, you know, the respiratory illnesses, vector-borne illnesses, gastrointestinal illnesses, non-communicable diseases, well-being, and mental health are all good.
Is it muted? Someone is saying?
So we can hear you, but I think Jody needs to be a bit closer to the mic.
Okay. It's supposed to pick up from here, but we know how technology goes sometimes. It's supposed to pick up everywhere in this room. Maybe it's the mask, Jody, if you want to take down your mask temporarily. I'll let her take her mask off for this.
We are seeing the results of the poll.
Can you hear me better?
Can you hear her
little.
now?
My voice. Okay, so far we're seeing that many persons, so 49, 52 persons answered so far, and the response astounding. Many persons think all of the above, so respiratory illnesses, vector-borne illnesses, gastrointestinal illnesses, non-communicable diseases, health and well-being are all informed by the Climate Health Bulletin. So I think we can continue the poll as the answers are still coming in. And again, in the lead, we have everyone thinking that all of the above, so all of the respiratory, vector-borne, gastrointestinal, non-communicable diseases, and health and well-being can be informed by the Health Climatic Bulletin. And we have 54 responses with 91 persons on the call. I think we'll give this question a few more seconds before we move on.
Can everybody see the results on their screen?
Excellent. So 55 persons in total participated in the, okay, I see we're still getting in the responses. So I'll give persons a few more seconds to finalize their thoughts. Okay, I think that's it. And so far the results are in, and everyone think that the Health Climatic Bulletin can be applied to. Okay. We're still getting responses, but I mean the results are changing a lot. So I think we're going to go ahead and close this poll now, and we can move on to the next slide.
You can go ahead.
Yes. Okay, so let's get back to it then. So that's one of the 4 questions we had for you. It's interesting that you thought, most of you thought, you know, a bulletin of this type really could be very helpful for all the areas that you would have seen. But this is a 2017 itself a survey done by the Pan American Health Organization as to country priorities for climate and health. All right. Now, obviously, the ones that we are most excited about are the ones we believe, the green ticks, that we believe our products and services could be of assistance to you when it comes to health decision making. So in the PAHO priorities survey, vector-borne diseases was a priority, weather emergencies, right? Of course, you know, flooding, tropical cyclones, and so on. Food security and safety, waterborne diseases, non-communicable diseases, air pollution, allergies, and heat-related illnesses. These were all seen under the PAHO survey as country priorities for climate and health. Now, we asked you intentionally about the climate, the health climatic bulletin before we actually jumped into a lot of the products and services that would be mentioned in here. So this, we are now at the 20th quarterly issue, and this would have started since May 2017. So our most recent bulletin, which came out in March, and that took us all the way up to May 2022. So this marked 5 years, 5th anniversary of this Caribbean Health Climatic Bulletin. I wonder if I were to ask how many of you were actually aware of this bulletin before? Of the, how many there are online? About 90, I heard. I wonder how many of you would say that I was aware that this bulletin existed. It would have been nice to poll that, but we didn't bother to poll that. What is in this bulletin that's now 5 years old? So we have insights on typical climate conditions for the upcoming season. But in other words, that's our we're talking about the forecast, right? What is on the horizon? So these outlooks ask you, so how wet might it be? Or how dry might it be? Or how hot might it be over the next few months? Or as we say, in the upcoming season. And really, when we talk about how wet, how dry, and how hot, this is how wet compared to normal. In other words, how wet compared to what we typically expect to get in our country or whatever part of the region it is. As our meteorologists and climatologists say, how wet relative to what is normal? How do we describe normal? Our lives are centered around our climate. What we do is centered around our climate. If you live in a place that snows heavily, in many months of the year, you might be into skiing. Yeah? So if you are in the tropics, you are accustomed, and I hope we should be accustomed, to wearing thinner clothing than somebody who wants to ski. If we are living in an area which is extremely wet and we have a lot of rivers and so on, our lifestyle is centered around the fact that we have wet conditions for much of the time. If we are in the Caribbean, in the Atlantic, we are accustomed to having threats from tropical cyclones for at least 6 months of the year. And we surround, our activities surround our climate. So we have key climate messages for the period that's upcoming. And it advises our health implications for a number of the health outcomes that you saw earlier that you voted on, like non-communicable diseases, vector-borne diseases, respiratory illnesses, gastrointestinal illnesses, but also one that I hope we don't ever neglect, well-being, and the last part of that well-being is mental health. Ask anybody who's been through Dorian or Maria or Irma or the floods that are going on right now in Suriname that's being responded to in Suriname. So Dima, I was in a meeting with them earlier, and they were speaking about how they had to activate their system to support Suriname. Ask any of them, and they'll talk about mental health as well. And that's something we don't often talk about when we come to such hazards. So when we're talking about respiratory illnesses, we're talking about Saharan dust. We're talking about humidities, moist conditions, right? Including flooding. Gastrointestinal illnesses, we talk about flooding, but you can also talk about drought, right? Because when there's a deficit in water, water can become contaminated because it's a small amounts. We talked about salinity in the groundwater being increasing during drought conditions. Non-communicable diseases, we're talking about heat exposure. We're talking about exposure to more ultraviolet radiation, right? We can talk about ozone hole, for example. Less of a discussion these days, thanks to you know which protocol, but also flooding and drought. Vector-borne diseases. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but temperature, excess rainfall, or flooding and drought, they all are key inputs or forecasts that allows us to respond to vector-borne illnesses. And then there are extreme events like flooding, drought, tropical cyclones, and heat waves. So all of these are discussed in various ways depending on the threat or the future conditions and recent past in this health climatic bulletin. And in it, you would recognize, if you can cursor to the top of the bulletin, Jody, if you can see Jody's, you can see 3 agencies that are responsible for producing this bulletin. It is not to your right, logos, Jody. To the right is not just CIMH on your right. That's our logo to the right. Right? But you can see that we have support from the Caribbean Public Health Agency. They've co-produced this with us, and the Pan American Health Organization. Why? Because they're the experts in health. So when we produce the climatic information, we have support from people who speak your language, who know your lingo, to express the potential implications of the climate we are suggesting for the next 3 months. So we'll talk just a little bit about respiratory illnesses. You had an entire discussion with one of our colleagues here at CIMH. I can't remember when the session was, where she was talking about dust and sand and so on, pollutants in the air. And we produce this, but that's on a weekly time scale. We produce weekly concentrations. If you look at your far right, you see the PM 2.5, PM 10 is not on this, but those are the particles coming across on the Saharan air layer, as we call it, the Saharan air layer. And just a week or 2 ago, it was very, very dense in the region. What I don't know, and this is where we need the partnership. What we don't know is what the impact was on the health sector, on the public. We need this sort of information to be able to provide more impacts-based forecast for you. With a certain density being forecasted, how likely it is that there'll be more visits to clinics and hospitals for nebulizing or whatever the case might be. But we know there's this link. We've heard that from the health experts, particularly our partners, CARPHA and PAHO. So we continue to deliver some of this. But we also have concerns when it comes to respiratory illnesses by moisture in the air. So if the air is going to be drier than normal, drought might be important. Or if it's going to be wetter than normal, the information at the bottom left, yes, where we talk about extreme rainfall events. We also tell you, is the next 3 months, is there likely to be more extreme rainfall events that can cause flooding? Would there be more than what we normally come to expect? Okay. So this is some of the information coming out of the Pan American node. So CIMH leads the Pan American node for sand and dust storm warning and alerting. And as I said to you, we forecast weekly, so every 7 days, the potential forecast for dust, ozone, PM 2.5 and PM 10. And you can see the website there if you needed to find out any further information. So I'm not going to get into the tool that is used and all that. We wouldn't expect that of you, but you might want to see the results of the model runs and so on. And that's where you can see the link there. So this is some more of outputs. And you can see on the right hand side, if you could just drag your cursor on the right hand side. Yeah, you can see on the right hand side, so dust coming across to our region in the Atlantic, and that is monitored, and it is also forecast for 7 days in advance. But I will not spend too much time on these. Yeah, you can cut it. On these particular products, because this was already the area of focus of one of your previous discussions. What is important to my group here, which is a different group to the group that forecasts the sun and the storms in the Caribbean, what is important to us is that we work with the health community to put out this information. And these are some experiments we had where we were forecasting a major dust event back in 2018. And we put out a couple of bulletins, a bulletin, two bulletins actually, 2 back-to-back bulletins. What we did, we worked with CARPHA, and CARPHA would have sent these bulletins to its the clientele it normally works with in the countries. And what we have here are these 2 bulletins alerting the region through CARPHA, through working with CARPHA, of a dust event that went, at least here you see 2 weeks, back-to-back weeks. I think it went on a little bit further, but we just experimented on this with CARPHA because we wanted to alert the region. So this is, okay, right. So those are some of the products we have when we're talking about dust and so on. So we're about to talk about vector-borne illnesses. And I want you to pay attention to this. I mean, it's probably one of the most difficult aspects of our work when it comes to climate, because when it comes to vectors, there are so many players in the discussion. But we wanted to eke out really what is the contribution of climate to the development of vector-borne illnesses in the Caribbean, particularly looking at dengue in one case. By the way, what we're going to have now, I'm going to turn back over to Jody, and she's going to ask you another question as we approach our look at vector-borne diseases. Jody, over to you. So,
Adrian, so I just shared the link in the chat. It's the same link, but I just reshared the link in the chat. So if persons could just let me know if they are able to access it. Okay, so we see that persons are able to access the link because we have the results coming in.
Is this the same question as before?
No. So this question, to your knowledge, the prevalence of dengue is
Okay, so we're trying to get the results to be shared on the screen. This will be done in a few seconds. Okay, you should see it coming up now.
So you can read them.
okay, thank you. So guys, to your knowledge, the prevalence of dengue, which is the most common vector-borne disease in the Caribbean, is influenced by which of the following? And we have excessive rainfall, drought, heat, and cold temperatures. So far, most persons think that excessive rainfall is, so dengue is influenced mostly by excessive rainfall. A few persons, about 8 persons, think is influenced by heat.
So what we're learning here is that clearly we are aware that excessive rainfall has a link with the prevalence of mosquitoes, the Aedes aegypti or Aedes albopictus, and therefore also a link to the prevalence of dengue, of Zika, of chikungunya, etc. What we're going to find out is that there's also a link with drought and heat, as some people would have identified. Actually, the fourth answer is a little bit of a trick question. Why am I saying that? Because, of course, those vectors, they don't survive in the cold. So, in a way, yes, if it's cold, it affects vector-borne illness, as in it is making it impossible for the vector to survive, and therefore the spreading of the disease to be significantly slowed down. But the cold temperatures, as soon as you get below a certain threshold, it doesn't affect the prevalence of the disease any further with even lower temperatures. With heat, it's a different thing. So, Jody, we can give it a few more seconds, but I think that most answers are in already.
Yeah, the results aren't changing much.
So we can clearly see that some of you are already aware that heat is an important factor, and a few of you are also aware that drought is a factor. So let's look at that. So we're going back to the slides. So we are looking here at finding out the reason why it's important to provide information from the climate side to the healthcare community. And the reason why is because it's such a big burden on our health systems, on our economy, and of course on our lives. So we're not just talking about dengue. As I said, we're talking, of course, of Zika and chikungunya. And we know that temperature affects the mosquito physiology in terms of when you have warmer temperatures, the biting rate of the mosquito increases. There's faster larval development of the mosquito, and there's different parts of the life cycle of the mosquito, but also of the virus that change in speed with higher temperatures. Of course, there's a limit to that as well. Once you go beyond a certain optimum temperature, it simply becomes too warm for the vector to efficiently survive or transmit the disease. For rainfall, the link is more complicated. What we have found in our research is that indeed, as most people identified correctly, more rainfall can increase the prevalence of vector-borne disease because it increased the containers outdoors where water can be consumed by the mosquito. So that means there's a more widespread habitat for larvae. What is also known is that when you have rainfall deficits leading to a drought, people tend to store water And sometimes the water storage is in containers that are not properly sealed, for instance. If that is the case, then the mosquito will tend to breed and to have their larvae, their eggs dropped in there, their larvae grow, and again you see an increased prevalence of the disease. So knowing that science that has come to our knowledge, we have actually tried to develop, along with a number of partners, a spatio-temporal model. That means simply it's looking at different areas through different times to support dengue early warning. And so if you were to look at existing models to forecast dengue prevalence, up until then, there were none that included how climate varies from season to season. And in not having that included, those models were correct up to 64% of the time. But now that we know that with higher nighttime temperatures, the risk of dengue outbreaks is increasing, and that from the rainfall side, 4 to 5 months after drought, and also 1 month after excessive rainfall, the prevalence of mosquitoes and the prevalence of dengue increases. Now that we include that in our new model, we have a model that correctly forecasts dengue outbreaks, not 64, but 86% of the time. And so I hope that you will recognize that with the reduced uncertainty from about 1/3 uncertainty to only 14% uncertainty, the more accurate information is easier to respond to. If you're 86% sure, it's easier to respond to than if it's 64% sure. So one prototype of such a model has been published and is under further development, but you can see the website here where you can look at an app for Barbados. So much of that research has been published. There are snapshots of the articles that published this research. And so for those who are interested, the links can be provided to such if necessary. So dengue is of course just one vector-borne disease, but we started with the one that was most prevalent. Okay, I think that someone's mic is unmuted. That person is called Alana. Okay, thank you. So if we are able to have models that forecast dengue risk as it evolves through time in the time scale of seasons, there must be products, climate information products that inform the evolution of those aspects of heat, drought, and rainfall. So similar as to what Adrian had presented for the respiratory illness, there are some products that we use to help determine what we think will be a more likely outcome going forward in terms of vector-borne illness. So on the right-hand side of this slide, you see the types of messages that are found under vector-borne illness in the Caribbean Health Climatic Bulletin, which is informed by monitoring products on drought, on excessive rainfall, also on temperatures. Remember, nighttime temperatures also influence mosquito prevalence and therefore the disease, and supplemented by outlook products such as the extreme rainfall products, the temperature forecast, and the drought forecast for the next season. And of course, also by the newsletters and bulletins which package that same information in a way that is clearer, either in terms of the hazard at stake, so this is drought, or in terms of the different hazards that are expected in a few months ahead. So this is how we get to our information that is contained in the Health Climatic Bulletin. Now moving on. Now moving on to gastrointestinal health, where we talk a lot about waterborne diseases. Of course, if we're talking waterborne diseases, then flooding is one of the major determinants of the prevalence of waterborne diseases. So this is especially when the forecast of excessive rainfall amounts, we call them very wet spells and extreme wet spells, and how their frequency changes between different seasons. If you expect more excessive rainfall events, then that means that your risk of flooding is increasing in a particular location. So if we have this excessive flooding, there will be disruption to sewage and water infrastructure. There will also be, because of that, impacts on sanitation and hygiene, which then leads to waterborne diseases such as gastroenteritis. Or I'm not an expert here, so I know that you know this much better than I do. But you can see again, drought also can have an impact, maybe not as frequently as extreme rainfall. But if there's a dire lack of water, then the water quality is also affected, as Adrian had mentioned before. So water quality and quantity can impact on waterborne diseases, which is why we also include this in our messaging. And then similarly, as we did for the previous category, when we looked at vector-borne illnesses, we employ our monitoring products, for instance, the SPI monitor, that blue and red and yellow map. We also track how much rainfall has fallen in a certain place compared to what usually falls by that time of the year, and that's the middle graph. And also we track what is the norm, when do we have the wet season, when is the wettest and when is the driest part of the year, which is the one at the bottom on the left. To that, we add our Outlooks products to check how will the situation be different than the norm, so that we can message out some clear information on hazards that will affect that may affect gastrointestinal illness. Okay, so then if we move on to non-communicable diseases, there are a host of non-communicable diseases that are linked to climate. I am just going to focus on one, which is part of the core of our research at CIMH with our partners, and that is the risk related to excessive heat exposure. Now, one very recent article has come out, and that was the first peer-reviewed article in the region that I'm aware of that looked at increased mortality due to heat waves. And if you see here, in the islands of Martinique, Fort-de-France, Guadeloupe, Pointe-à-Pitre, and in the territory of French Guyana, Cayenne, you can see that there are people who die when you have a top 10% warmest day. So if you rank all the temperatures of the day over many, many years, and you just look at the top 10%, this is what we call the 90th percentile. So heat waves happen when you have several days of temperatures above the 90th percentile consecutively. And you can see here that there is added mortality related to these heat waves. And that's why it becomes important, just like for dengue, that we provide information from the climate side to inform heat and health. And similarly, drought and flooding can also, of course, compound to the prevalence of non-communicable diseases. But let's go a little bit further on heat. Now, you know this better than me, that some health impacts of excessive heat can include, for public health, for instance, a strong increase in mild heat symptoms during the hottest part of the year, an increase in heat illnesses, fainting episodes, hospitalizations, health services needs when you have heat waves, particularly prolonged heat waves, a potential increase in biological risk, for instance, as we've seen the Aedes mosquito borne diseases and gastrointestinal disease linked to heat, etc. But there's also impacts on occupational health for instance, heat exhaustion, and very importantly for our economies, reduced labor productivity. Indeed, billions of hours of labor are lost to heat around the world every year, including in the Caribbean. And finally, there's also the impact, of course, on well-being, increased sweating, water consumption, snacking and binge eating, which leads to acute negative health impacts, and increased fatigue, irritability, and leading in the longer term even to aggression. So clearly, there are different ways in which heat can impact our health, and that means it's important to provide information related to health. Now, on the climate change timescale, so that's the very long timescales of decades until the end of the century, for instance, what we see in our research is that heat waves are becoming more and more prevalent during what we call the Caribbean heat season. The Caribbean heat season lasts more or less from May until October each year, and that's the season in which most of the heat waves happen. If you follow the graphs for the Leeward Islands and the Windward Islands in the Eastern Caribbean, you can see in black the observed increase in percentage of time during that heat season, that 6 months period in which you have heat waves. So up to 3 months in that season is filled up with heat waves in both parts of the Eastern Caribbean. That means that it's already important, it's already becoming quite a stressful thing to cope, but equally it's a new threat because look back at before 1995, and it only happened less than 20% of the time. So excessive heat being an unfamiliar hazard of which the impact potential, so the chance that it will affect our health has been on the rise since the 90s and is now moderate to high and projected to become high to extremely high for the entire duration. So basically 6 months heat waves. The heat waves from the 2030s mean that we need to start paying attention to heat much more now. And because of that, of course, one of the ways in which we can provide information for the now is to produce heat wave forecast. Here you see an example of such a heat wave forecast where we are expressing in the percentage of time during the heat season that will be spent in heat waves, how much that will elevate the risk due to heat exposure. And so if you have the red colors, that means there's an extremely high relative risk. That means that you can expect the prevalence of diseases related to heat to really spike. If it's high, it's going to be higher than normal. It's going to happen quite a lot. It's going to impact us, but maybe not in a catastrophic way. If it's slight, that means that it might be manageable. If it's marginal, it means it's not that much of an issue. But what you see for the upcoming season from July to September is a moderate relative risk. So that means that we are going to see, but to a limited extent, health impacts in the coming season. And why is it only moderate this year versus a very hot year like was the case in 2020 in the Caribbean? That relates to what we see is happening with our global climate, which sometimes has warmer years, sometimes has colder years, this year being a cooler year.
Thank you, Cedric. Again, we will move on to another poll question. And I will share the link in the chat. Can everyone please let me know if they're able to access the link? And as soon as we're through, I think we'll be able to address, because we have a lot of questions in the chat.
All right, yeah, so we should have about 15 minutes to respond.
Okay. So we'll go right ahead now to the Mentimeter poll questions.
And while Jody is bringing that up, we just want to make sure that you know that all of these products that we're presenting to you are freely accessible from our website. Our website, which we will put in the chat as well, which is rcc.cimh.edu.bb.
And you'll see it again come up on the final slide. Anyway.
So the question asked, Caribbean temperature is increasing over time due to climate change. Heat waves are likely to become more impactful on our health system, not affect us in any way, or become a higher priority for health responders. And so far, we have 9 persons responding. Well, the responses are coming in, and so far, persons are saying yes, they expect it to become more impactful on our health systems. And persons also think, you know, the temperature increasing will definitely become a higher priority for health responders. So we give you guys some time. So far, no one thinks it's not going to affect us. It won't affect us in any way.
I see here that some people are also answering the chat, so thank you for doing that as well.
And the result seems to be pretty much the same going across this poll, where most persons believe that, you know, increasing temperatures will become more impactful on our health systems and require a high priority for health responders. I see the numbers are still coming in, so we'll give you guys a few more seconds before we close this poll. And if you have any difficulty, please indicate in the chat. I could resend you the link.
Oh boy, 0 not affect us in any way. Interesting.
I think the numbers have coming in, and the results are pretty much the same. Results are not changing that much, with 42 persons responding so far. Most persons believe that it will be more impactful on our health systems and require a higher priority for health responders.
So here I'm concluding from this massive response that either you are receiving information that could be useful for you in terms of heat affecting us in a big way, or that I'm actually not instructing you anything new. And in that case, that's good too, because that means you were already aware. So in any case, thank you for taking the time to respond to these questions. And it's really great to see that we're all on the same line in terms of what we believe is important.
So we are into our last section now of the Health Climatic Bulletin. We're introducing now a discussion on well-being and mental health. Of course, when we talk about well-being and mental health, we include things like injury to persons because of our climate system, displacement, damage and loss, and of course, our mental state. That becomes very important. And if you look at this, this table here, I don't believe I have to have a compelling case for action for Caribbean people. Maybe some people were saying the Guianas, we don't have to worry about tropical cyclones, but the Guianas, you have to worry about heavy rainfall and flooding. You also have to be concerned in coastal areas about swells, sea swells, I mean, that could cause flooding as well. But obviously, there is this compelling case. You see a number of examples there of flooding. We have examples, of course, related to tropical cyclones. I mean, if we think of the most recent past, when it comes to tropical cyclones, I am sure I don't have to mention the names Dorian, Maria, and Irma to anybody in the Caribbean. Even if you were not one in the path of any of these systems, we knew the extent of the impact. I mean, ever since 2009, we have had significant impacts from drought. We have had the 2009-2010 event, which was one of the worst in over 40 years, forced the heads of governments of CARICOM to meet specifically on that event. And they engaged CIMH and then CEHI, Caribbean Environmental Health Institute, which is now which is part of CARPHA, to put together an article advising the region on how we go from there, right? So that's drought, and I just mentioned flooding. There are many episodes of flooding related to tropical cyclones, but if we talk about the Guianas, they have heavy flooding, and they don't get tropical cyclones. And most of the flooding didn't occur in the tropical cyclone, Atlantic tropical cyclone season anyway. And then we have the last one, which is heat waves. Cedric mentioned 2020, which was record breaking. I am wondering if they were related to health morbidity or even mortality increases because of the heat wave. Excessive heat back in 2020, a little bit less so in 2021, but hot nonetheless. But gladly, based on what Cedric just presented, maybe that particular one, that particular hazard, we may have to worry about less, not at all, because you're going to still get some heat wave days, right? But we probably will worry about that less relative to 2020 in particular, this season. So I'm sure these things are not unfamiliar to many of us. So when it comes to injury, displacement, damage, and losses that affect our well-being and mental health, of course, we talk about strong winds, storm surge, intense rainfall from tropical cyclones. Most of that will be related to weather forecast, but we also forecast for the season, and we'll talk about that in a little while. But we also have flooding that can cause landslides. A lot of people have lost homes in landslides, parcels of land, and even in some cases, their lives, right? So we have injury to persons because of cyclones and floods and landslides. We have damage to health facilities. This is something we need to talk about. What's the name of the hospital in Dominica? Princess Margaret, that's the right name, James? That suffered significant damage during Maria, you know?
Yeah, Princess Margaret.
Safe health facilities is a discussion we should be talking about when it comes to not only tropical cyclones, but even significant flooding and so on, because we lose significant parts of our infrastructure, even from flooding with mud and water and so on that can cause damage. So with these, you can have injury, damage and loss, feeling of hopelessness. I have heard of many cases of hopelessness in Maria, Irma, and Dorian over the last, Maria and Irma were 2017, Dorian 2019. Significant impacts on mental health, and this is something we ought to have concerns about. And next slide. Is there? Oh. Yeah. So of course these are some of the products we can talk about. The one at the bottom left, if you can cursor, Jody, the bottom left. Yeah, that's just telling you based on our climatology, where we have the most significant number of storms and cyclones. And it peaks somewhere in September. Many meteorologists in the Atlantic will tell you somewhere around September the 10th it peaks. But we know we can get tropical cyclones even before the hurricane season in June. It has happened. And we have had the occasions where it lasted. We got one a couple occasions after November 30th. So is it the hurricane? If you get it in January or February 2023, is that 22 hurricane season or is it 23 hurricane season? Anyway, so it happens. But being able to forecast the Atlantic hurricane season starting last year, and thanks to Cedric, our climatologist, we started to make our own forecast, compare it to the ones that we're very familiar with coming out of NOAA and coming out of the Colorado State University. I'm sure that many people who follow these systems know about William Gray. So we know he's been forecasting for quite some time and he has now his students that has followed him. I should say the late William Gray, or some know him as Bill Gray. So we do our own forecast. If you look at the right, it's looking at, once you see red on the right hand side, those three pie charts, you can just point them out, right? It tells you what is the likelihood of the season, different time chunks in the season, being above normal or below normal or normal. And you see the largest part of the pie is red. So we are expecting more active than normal season. Okay, so we have in the table, you see it broken down into the first half, the second half, and then the peak time of the season, which is August to October. And we would indicate the number of storms and so on expected at those times. And also the accumulated cyclone energy, which is more or less an indication of the number of hurricanes, how strong they were, and how long they lasted, right? So number, strength, and duration of these across the entire season. And that's what we talk about when we talk about the accumulated cyclone energy, and it's expected to be higher than normal. But also, when we're talking about loss and damage, flooding is very, very important, right? An important part of the discussion, and it does not have to be associated with a tropical cyclone at all. Okay, so these are the products that we provide relative to this part of the discussion when we are talking about well-being and mental and your mental conditions and mental health. Okay, so this is the last section, right? This is the last section dealing with that we have in our climatic health bulletin. Before we turn over for questions, we'll have our final poll, and we'll turn over to Jody, and then I was saying 15 minutes or probably about 10 minutes after the poll to answer any questions you might have. So Jody, over to you.
Thanks, Adrian. I am sending the link in the chat again.
So this is the final poll now.
And the persons could just indicate whether they are able to access the link. And I see persons have already started, so I will share the results.
So the first two questions had a separate link. The last two questions, including this one, have a separate link. So please click on the last one that Jody put in the chat.
All right, so question, please rate your level of agreement with the following statement. As a health practitioner, would you find the information presented in the Caribbean Health Climatic Bulletin useful to making professional, strategic, and/or operational decisions going forward? And you're asked to state your level of agreement from strongly agree to strongly disagree. And so far, a lot of persons strongly agree that the information presented in the Caribbean Health Climatic Bulletin would be useful to making strategic and/or operational decisions going forward. A few people don't agree, and we don't have anyone that say no, they completely disagree. No, actually, we have 5 people like this. No, you know, the information is not presented in a way. Not presented, the information presented in the bulletin is not that useful to making strategic and/or operational decisions. I'm wondering if that could be because what you're looking for is not in the bulletin. That could be another follow-up question, Adrian, where we could see in another session what it is that these persons who answered that they disagree would like to see. But so far, the answers are coming in. A lot of persons agree, yes, the information would be useful to making strategic and/or operational decisions. So far, we have 48 persons responding, and the results are changing a lot. So I think we're going to give it a few more seconds before we go ahead and close this poll. And then we can start the the questions in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. And again, the results have not changed much. Of the 50 persons that answered, 44, well, the results are still coming in. 45 no persons believe. Yes, they agree that the information definitely would be useful in helping them to make strategic and operational decisions, while 5 persons don't think the information will be useful, and 1 person is not really sure. I will close the poll now, and then we'll go ahead to answer some of the questions that are in the chat.
James, have you been monitoring the chat at all to know which questions you might want to engage? Have you been? It's been difficult for
Yeah,
us
I have,
because there were
and
so
we
many.
have one of the adjunct faculty here, Dr. De Freitas, is putting the questions into a form to pass to you. Are you winding up now, or is?
Yeah, so for the next 10 minutes, we're open to questions.
Okay, well, let me thank you very much, Adrian and Cedric and Jody. You guys did a good 3-person tag team, and you explained very well different concepts: weather, which is hours and days and weeks, and season, which is months, and the climate time scale of decades. And the things are changing. We never used to pay as much attention to heat, and we are in the last 15, 20 years seeing more hot days and hot nights, and the implications that has for people's health, cardiovascular health, mental health, and for things like vector-borne diseases. So thank you very much. I just keep thinking, as I've asked when I meet with you guys before, how do we get this information, really get it to practitioners? There are 9,000 doctors and 20,000 nurses in the Caribbean, and the vast majority of them are not aware that this information exists. So I think we do have to do better at getting it to practitioners. And I know there are, you put forward some answers as to how it's done now. So it would be good to evaluate this actually and see the extent to which the target audiences are receiving this information and are they acting upon it. But I liked all the charts that you used, and you took us through a lot of key issues: heat and rain and dust. And really, it's moving towards a more climate smart health surveillance system, which I've been working on a project with the Trinidad and Tobago health system to see how we could do that. The data you presented for Barbados and better able to predict dengue outbreaks, I mean, that's just great. So let me take a stab at some of the questions here to pass them to you. We've got, if I can find them, wait a sec. So we're going to try, and our time's really limited, so try and pass to you the kind of the more ones that struck us as more important. And I've been asking one of them, where can health professionals really get this information? Most health professionals are not aware of CIMH's work. Is there a plan to do an app or to get seasonal advisories to health professionals?
Yeah, so the question whether an app can be produced, yes, but that would have to be invested in. So if that becomes a major priority, this can be discussed. At this time, we don't have the level of IT support to be able to do that for each sector, for each part of the Caribbean, etc. So this is a question of prioritization. If this becomes a priority, this could be addressed in future. Now,
Okay.
instead of that, for now, we have put a link in the chat to the direct link to all the issues of the bulletin, the Health Climatic Bulletin. That is a link that does not change. So whenever, in whatever year you are, at least for the foreseeable future, that link will stay the same. So, sorry?
Thanks for that, Cedric. We can certainly send that out to all
Yes.
over 1,000 people registered for this course, so we can to those individuals to their email.
Thank you.
Has the Barbados model been used to predict dengue? Is it available to other Caribbean countries, or do you need different data to do it?
This is a pilot that is based on data that was provided by the Ministry of Health in Barbados and by the Met Service of Barbados, along with CIMH and along with some other project collaborators from the
State University. of
the
New
state.
York,
Yes.
back then,
Sorry.
SUNY. And
The State University of New York and the London
School of Hygiene. What's it called? London School of
tropical
Hygiene
hygiene
and
and medicine.
Medicine. Yeah, something like that.
And so this
Okay.
consortium has been building that as a pilot through a project. And now if this becomes a major interest, a major priority to the region, this could be pursued for other countries as well, of course. And we have started such a similar exercise in Dominica. We haven't reached the point where we have an app for Dominica yet, but that could be done as well for any country that that prioritizes this along with us and our many partners.
Okay. A question from Anastasia Jordan. What is being done to address gaps between the links mentioned, impacts such as dust and heat, to the impact on healthcare in Barbados? And how do we get this information to inform how we plan to address these events in the health sector? And these questions, they're similar to a question Crystal asked. Is the health system linking respiratory illness to Sahara dust?
I want to say one thing, especially when it comes to heat. We found, I think heat was one, and the other one was Sahara dust that this person is asking about. Very important, and if we use heat as the example, is the data from the health system. One thing is to have climate information, but how do we build the relationship? The relationship has to be built with health information. And it's very difficult, and I can understand why. I mean, I raised this with some doctors already in Barbados on a discussion similar to this. It wasn't necessarily it wasn't specific to climate. I raised the climate issue because they were talking about things like cardiac health and so on. And when you're talking about heat, how do we know from the data that that some illness was related to heat? It's not it's not disaggregated. But I mean, someone might die from some sort of cardiac or kidney failure or whatever the case might be. The straw that brought the camels back may well be the heat conditions, but it's recorded as something related to cardiac arrest or kidney renal failure or whatever the case might be. You see, so it's very difficult then. So what exercise in Grenada actually use the aggregated data and see if there's a relationship between the conditions of heat that is related to temperature or humidity, right, or a combination of the two really, and these outcomes, these aggregated outcomes. And you know, when we start to look at these, I mean, look at the French manuscript that Cedric talked about when they made a link with the 90th percentile in temperature. So there is that relationship, but how can we get the health data now to really build on that so that we can build a model that we can not only talk about heat wave days being forecasted, but what is the impact on our health? So we're talking about impacts-based forecasting. It is not what the climate will be, but what the climate is likely to do. That's where we want to go.
Excellent point you're raising that needs a bit more of a deeper dive. There are technical approaches like sentinel surveillance approaches. You don't have to have the whole health system. You can have one or two hospitals that are specialized in linking, you know, asthma to Sahara dust and so on. Last question is about what kind of software are you using to develop the models? And can it be used to have more joined up predictive models to provide information to responders?
So I will try to answer this one as the climatologist, because this is my territory in terms of development of prediction systems. What we try to do, because mind you, it's not just CIMH, it's for all the Met services across the region. And not all the Met services have a big manpower. Some of them have less than 10 people on staff. is to make sure that any prediction system is one, state of the art, two, and much more important, not burdensome on the human resources. So that means it needs to be simple. And three, must have a good predictive skill. In other words, the forecasts are accurate, because if you don't know how accurate your forecasts are, or if your forecasts are inaccurate, there's no use in using the information. And so because of those three considerations, fortunately, in many cases, we can use similar, very simple statistical models that can do a very good job, like the one for Barbados, where we could explain 86% of variability. So that means 86% of accuracy. And those models are models that all of our Met services across the region are getting continued training in through the Caribbean Climate Outlook Forum. Now, of course, because we are climatologists, the focus has been on climate forecasting. And because we haven't had the requisite amount of impacts data from the health impact data, we couldn't make it all the way to operational systems of, for instance, dengue risk prediction across the region. But we're getting there, we're getting started, and we are seeing projects come up that focus, or that have as a focus, to expand that evidence base, that database that we need to build our models along with the sector practitioners, whether it be within CARPHA, within PAHO, within the ministries of health, within clinics. All of this will depend highly on the availability of data. And once the data is there, the development of the models is a very simple thing. But the cleanliness and the availability of data is key, as Adrian has mentioned.
Thank you very much, Cedric. I mean, I give Chris, one of our participants, Crystal, a sort of last word by saying, I agree, each field cannot work in isolation. Everyone needs to work together to get a desirable outcome. And I hear that plea from you, that the health sector, in a way, needs to work more closely so the climate data, the Met Office data can be better related to health outcomes. And so our predicting our weather and seasonal and climate outlooks can become more meaningful. And we're not just subject to these experiences and not able to be resilient, because they are going to get worse. That's the. So thank you very, very much, Adrian. Thank you very much, Cedric and Jodianne, for a good session. I think you've whetted a lot of appetites, a lot of areas for further work and further research. Thank you to all the participants. Look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow evening at what will be the last lecture of this course. And have a good evening. Thanks again.
Thank you.